State of Care.
Hello and welcome to State of Care Podcast Episode 4. This is the platform that provides inclusiveness to the care industry and presented to you by myself, Afra Safa.
Hello, all, and myself, Leonard Tanner.
Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Haben Ghezai, who's a clinical psychologist working with the NHS. Dr. Haben is here today to share some of her thoughts on children with mental health difficulties and refugees dealing with trauma. Thanks for joining us today, Haben. Please tell listeners a bit about yourself and what you're doing.
Hi, Afa and Leonard. Thank you for having me. So I currently work in the NHS. We, as part of that role, we work in a detention centre providing healthcare for asylum seekers, refugees and foreign offenders.
Right.
I guess outside of that role, I also volunteer and I'm also a member of a women's charity that work to advocate and promote well-being amongst vulnerable women.
Wow, fantastic! That's really impressive, Haben, to say the least. Thanks again for joining us on this show. I just wanted to get into it with the first question. So according to the research, 1 out of 10 children and young people are affected by mental health issues. The alarming thing is that 70% of those children and young people have not received an intervention at a sufficient age to better manage their mental state. So my question to you is, how do people's parents know if their child or children has a mental issue, and how do they handle it?
When a parent or anyone in a child's kind of social network may want to flag up or maybe want to become more aware of when support may be needed. So I guess you can call them red flags.
Yeah.
There may be a few key things that may indicate someone's struggling with their mental health.
Okay.
So I guess there may be key particular things to look out for, like mood changes, sadness, withdrawal from family activities, friends or relationships, or even at school or at home, whether or not they're experiencing some intense feelings like fear or anxiety. Sometimes with anxiety come like, racing hearts and fast breathing, extreme worry, which at times can be a very normal reaction to particular situations. But when these kind of moods like worry and low moods and increased anxiety persist over a really long time and start to interfere with a young person's daily functioning and routine, that might be a sign that there might be something a little bit more serious going on.
Okay.
So, sometimes you may look out for changes, more drastic changes in behavior. So, they might be getting into more arguments and fights, not wanting to go to school. They might be staying away from home a lot more, not wanting to leave the house at all. You might see behavior changes like sleeping too much or too little. There might be difficulties concentrating. This might be reflected in difficulties sitting still, or difficulties focusing their attention, or may reflect in changes in their grades. For example, there may be unexplained weight loss.
Yeah.
And you may also look for physical symptoms in children. So are they complaining of more headaches all of a sudden, or stomach pains? And this tends to be more common in children, and may often be their way of kind of communicating that they're sad about something or anxious, whereas adults sometimes have more of a language to communicate sadness and anxiety. In some particular cases, some young people who experience extreme distress may also deliberately inflict harm on themselves. We often refer to this as self-harm.
Yeah.
So they may start drinking alcohol, using drugs, or cutting. So, this isn't an exhaustive list, but they may just be a few of the things that you might notice in someone who might be struggling with their mental health. But having said all of this, it's always really important to think about what's going on in a child's life that may be leading them to feel sad or distressed or upset, or that might be causing a change in behavior. So, for example, exams tend to be a time where someone may feel more anxious, and that's going to be really normal in the context of exams. Or if their parents or a child's parents may be going through divorce, and that might be a time where a child's particularly sad. or you might be looking out for if a child's being bullied at school, and that might be a reason why they don't want to go to school and they may have difficulties leaving the house. So it's also really important to think about what's going on in a child's context and not necessarily assume that any kind of changes in behaviour to do with a mental illness. Because if a child's being bullied, there may be other things that we need to deal with, like whether that needs to be reported to the police or whether the school's aware, and not label that as a mental health difficulty.
Yeah, that was very comprehensive. No, thank you.
To say the least, yeah. You know what I think is really concerning is that I think this is Haben just highlighted something here that happens in a lot of people's lives in everyday life. I think this is a really common issue, really, and I think a lot of parents will probably be very anxious to understand how to deal with it. So, what I'd like to ask you is, what would you advise? What can parents do if they suspect their child's suffering from mental health problems? What's your thoughts on that, Haben?
Well, there are a lot of services out there that parents can refer to or speak to. Sometimes there are services available in schools, like schools can put extra support in place. There might be school counsellors or educational psychologists that the school have contact with. So I think it's always worth starting with the school and making sure they're aware that there are these difficulties. I think it's always important. Children exist in many systems, and I think it's really important that systems be able to work together to support a child. I think it's really important that a child's mental health isn't just a responsibility of the parents, and that is the responsibility of everyone who has contact with that parent. So it's always, so the school may be a good place to start. Parents can also go to their GP and ask for mental health support for their children. There's IAT, which stands for Increasing Access to Psychological Therapies. So you can self-refer into that, or you can ask your GP to refer you. And there are a number of different charities available for young people and children that also work to support people. But I'd say the most important thing a parent or a friend or the school can sometimes do is start with where the young person's at and talk to them and try and understand what's going on for them and what's going on in their world and what they're struggling with, and talk and ask them how they feel they can be supported. It's always important to never dismiss or minimize their concerns or worried or tell them to brighten up or get over it. I think we all as human beings long to be understood, and that's not different for children. So there's something so vital about being able to validate a children's concerns and difficulties and work with them in thinking about what support they might need, because sometimes the change may not be about changing how the young person's feeling. It may be adjustments we as the parent or the professional, the school may need to make to support that young person.
Yes, so the parent is to be a bit more aware to these common issues, and also maybe allow communication.
But also not just the parent. I guess us as a society, as professionals, as schools. I think a young person's mental health is the responsibility of everyone.
Most definitely.
There you go. It takes a village to raise a child.
Definitely, yeah.
This isn't any different, I think.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So I mean, just moving on to the next hot topic, as it were, which in with the current climate at the moment, it has been a big topic across the country. Refugees and asylum seekers. So as of 2015, there were 123 refugees or asylum seekers in the UK, with this large number of people experiencing poor mental health than the general population. Why might this be, Helen, from your experience? What are you noticing?
Research has shown that a large proportion of refugee people and the asylum seeking population do experience high numbers of mental health difficulties. However, I guess I'm also very mindful that when we talk about this population, I don't want to homogenize a whole group of people with a number of different experiences. Individuals will always have a number of different experiences. So I guess it's important to say from the outset that there's going to be differences and similarities between different communities and different things that impact an individual's mental health. But I guess when thinking about why individuals who are seeking asylum or refugee people may experience poorer mental health, I would always, I guess it's important to think of a number of different things. So, their pre-migration difficulties, so the difficulties they face prior to leaving their country. Many individuals may have experienced war, torture, sexual exploitation. They would have lost a number of different loved ones. They may have had denial of basic necessities. They may have experienced modern day slavery or torture. A number of different things that would have impacted how they view the world and, their mental health, so to speak. And, it's also important to think about that they also experience a number of extreme adversity on transit to their host countries. The physical transition to places like the UK is rarely a safe one. And, statistics already show that the majority of refugee people live in refugee camps. And whilst this is supposed to be a point of refuge, we know there's a lot of violence and illness and risk that exist within these camps.
Yeah.
So they're not the safest of places, and it's important to think about all that might have been experienced on their journey as well as their pre-migration experiences. So that journey alone could be quite a difficult one.
Yeah, we see it all the time, don't we? We see it all the time on the news. All these small canoe boats and people dropping out of the boats on sea, or boats going on fire, and it's horrendous.
It is, and that's just the little what we see on the television.
Yeah.
See, we couldn't even imagine.
But in addition to that, the difficulties don't stop when they get to the UK. Many people make it to the UK because they seek safety and want a better life, but often the difficulties persist for them. Not only do they face loss of their cultural community and separation from their family and those they would have had to leave behind, but many people often face homelessness, racism, discrimination, especially in this kind of era of Brexit and austerity.
Yeah.
They also face difficulties accessing support and services. They're having to learn a new language. They may feel very isolated from their communities. They're often people may not be allowed to work or lack of education or employment opportunities. But on top of that, the process of seeking asylum, immigration process via the Home Office is often a very difficult one. They're often having to repeat their difficulties and their torture stories again and again to in the kind of Home Office interviews, and where they're questioned for accuracy and truthfulness. And I can't think of anything worse than having to tell the worst things that have happened to me to a complete stranger for several hours while they question me on how truthful I'm being. They're often stuck in a system that has no sense of security or certainty as to whether they'll be granted asylum in this country. And they may often be left with a sense of not having to belong anywhere, or left in a country that doesn't necessarily feel like it wants you. So for example, in the UK in particular, the government introduced hostile environment policy. And this was a set of administrative and legislative measures designed to make staying in the UK as difficult as possible for those without leave to remain. So you can, I guess, and the hope of that was that people would voluntarily leave. So you can imagine, on top of everything you've experienced, living in the UK with a hostile environment policy will make things even worse.
Yeah. Wow, it's that's so difficult. It's such a sensitive topic. I couldn't imagine how you'd even go about that. What would work look like? So, if you was to do some work with these individuals who may have gone through traumatic experiences, what would that work look like? What would that support look like?
I'm always really mindful. I guess the number one way individuals would need to be supported, in my opinion, is, you know, thinking about changes to government policy and legislation, thinking about the environment we create for individuals who are seeking safety in a different country.
Sure.
You know, I think it's important to create systems and structures that are more supportive as individuals try to settle and build a new life in the UK. So thinking about immigration processes that won't perpetuate this stress, thinking about the levels of racism and discrimination refugee and asylum-seeking populations experience. I also believe it's important for services to be set up and adapted to respond at community levels and reach out to support refugee populations in ways that suit them and that are culturally appropriate, instead of expecting kind of more Western models of mental health to fit different groups of individuals and communities that may have very different understandings of mental health. So, you know, there are particular ways of working with trauma that have been set up. And there are, so those kind of more typical ways tend to include therapies such as, you know, CBT for trauma or narrative exposure therapy or EMDR. And there are many services set up for those who would like that kind of support, which is great. And it's important to have a variety of support out there. But, you know, I think there are many different levels we could be working at when it comes to support for individuals, asylum-seeking people and refugee people.
Okay, fantastic, Dr. Haben. So, I mean, to be honest, your insight has been extremely helpful today. You've highlighted a lot of very key issues regarding mental health of children and the challenges that asylum seekers go through when it's in effect trying to gain asylum in the UK, and the mental stresses that they would have had to endure, and the challenges, I guess, when they get here of navigating that, and that's quite important to raise awareness on that side as well, because there was always ramifications, I guess, of very very traumatic situations, and I appreciate your time in explaining that. So just in regards to our listeners, this is all for today for episode 4. Had a great insight from Dr. Haben, perspective on some really concerning topics, and we would love to hear your thoughts as well, live on air via social media interactions. So Haben, thanks for coming around and spending time with us. And if you have any questions on today's show or would want to participate in the future shows, please find us at www.totalcareunit.com. Our email address is info@totalcareunit.com, and our Twitter is twitter.com/state_of_care. And this is Leonard and Afa. Until next time, goodbye.